This is the High School Football America podcast for February the 23rd, 2022. I'm Jeff Fisher. Just a reminder, time is running out to get in your nominations, coaches, for the second annual High School Football America Academic All-America team powered by Scout Smart. The 28th of February, the end of the month, is the deadline. Make sure you go to highschoolfootballamerica.com to get all the details real quickly. 3.6 GPA is what you need. That's the minimum on a 4.0 scale. And you can email us at aaa@highschoolfootballamerica.com. The High School Football America podcast is brought to you by GameStrat, America's premier sideline instant replay system with outstanding reliability, faster speed than Huddle's sideline, and GameStrat has awesome customer service along with different plans priced right for every coach's budget. And there's a special going on, and that only has 5 days remaining. Great discounts from GameStrat. To get a demo, go to GameStrat.com or click on the GameStrat banner ad located on every page of highschoolfootballamerica.com. Heading back to somewhere near my old stomping grounds. Pennsylvania is all of my stomping grounds, I guess, if I think about it. I love the state of Pennsylvania when it comes to high school football. We've had great players from there, great programs. And one of the programs that we've highlighted on highschoolfootballamerica.com has been the Southern Columbia Tigers. 3 straight back-to-back small schools national championships. They won another state championship last year, 5th in a row, but they couldn't get 4 national titles in a row because they actually lost. They had a 65-game winning streak snapped with a loss, and they are just a great program up there. We've had Coach Roth on here before, and there is a book now that's out about Southern Columbia football. It's called The Roaring Tigers, The History of Southern Columbia Football, written by Merrill Shaffer, and he's on the line right now to join us to talk about this great book that a lot of people know all the wins, Merrill, but not many people know that they didn't necessarily start out as the behemoth football program that they are right now. Thanks for taking some time with me today.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate you having me on.
And you know, it's funny. I get the question all the time, you know, Southern Columbia, where is it? And I generally have to, you know, especially when it's Pennsylvania and I know the areas real well, I've got to put on my ambassador hat. But I know you don't live there. You're about an hour away in Hershey, Pennsylvania. But draw a little bit of a picture for the people about where exactly Catawissa, Pennsylvania is.
Well, I think a lot of people associate that area, the Elysburg, Catawissa area, with, if people are familiar with Knoebels Grove Amusement Park, that's pretty, I think some people nationally, that's pretty well known. But it is central Pennsylvania, kind of the northern part of central Pennsylvania. I would say Bloomsburg is probably the closest town, you know, larger town. So it's in that general area, Columbia County, you know, so it's in certainly a rural part of the state. I think a lot of people associate it initially with the coal region of Pennsylvania,
right? But
to be truthful, it's more of a farm region than anything there. Yeah, definitely a rural town. I think Julian Fleming, who, you know, the great receiver that played there, who's now at Ohio State, he once referred to it as a little school between 2 cornfields. And to be truthful, that is exactly what it is. You know, it literally is that. So, I mean, it's a really small school. In fact, it's funny, you know, the reason that I started this book in the first place was we camp every year. They have what's called a covered bridge festival up in that area every year in the fall. In October, we would go up there and we'd see all these cars pulling into this tiny little school on Friday nights up there. Mm-hmm. And at one point, I just, you know, I'm like, what? Who is this school? You know, it's hard. We could hear them cheering from, you know, a mile away or 2 miles away, and I literally at one point sat around a campfire and Googled Southern Columbia, and I'm like, wait a minute, this can't possibly be the same school. I think at that point they won 8 championships. I'm like, this tiny little school, we got this powerhouse, you know, this gem of a program right in our own backyard, and it's amazing. I think they're more nationally known to some degree than maybe they are in their own home state, because outside of their area up there, unless you've played them in like postseason play, in other parts of the state, it's amazing to me that, they're not as well known even in Pennsylvania. And especially in the central Pennsylvania area. Again, I live right outside of Hershey, and they've played 20 state championship games, and most of those have been played at Hershey Park Stadium. And when you mentioned them around this area, it's amazing to me how many people did not know who they were. And that was one of the reasons I felt compelled to write this book. Again, I have no affiliation with the school, but I'm a fan from afar. And I really, the more I dug into this story, the more I really found this program fascinating. And some of the stories even off of the field are just amazing. And I just felt like that story needed to be told, and it was truly my honor to do so.
Yeah, you've done a great job of cataloging this from the early 60s through what we've become to know here at High School Football America is one of the predominant small programs in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 6 classifications. They're in 2A, so the next to smallest, and they won a lot of their titles at 1A. The book is available on Amazon and Sunbury Press. We'll get to that in a little bit. I'm talking with Merrill Shaffer today. He's written the book Roaring Tigers. One of the things that I did not know, and I'll tell you what, Merrill, I have the same issue when it comes to describing where the school is, because it is about as rural can be. What surprised me, and you said this early on, it might have even been in the first chapter, is it's 108 square miles. That's a lot of area when you think about it, but again, not a lot of population. So that was one fact that I got. Let's dive into actually the program itself, starting in the early 60s. And I know this from Coach Roth, but I'd love to have you talk about it. It did not begin as a football power by any stretch of the imagination. There was another sport that the community kind of embraced. So give us a little history of what it was like back in the 60s as a Tiger putting on a football helmet.
Well, it was certainly the school started, Southern Columbia basically started, there was a merger of three school districts that merged to form the Southern Columbia Area School District. And the first year was 1962. Their first junior varsity team was in 1962, but at that point in time, the predominant sport in the area was soccer. Mm-hmm. And, literally when they started the program the first year at the school, a gentleman by the name of Patrick Mondock became the first coach. And he literally was going around house to house to try to recruit players to sign up to play football. And it was, it's funny. They actually, for a fledgling program like that, their first varsity season was in 1963. And they did fairly well. Their first year, I think they were 4-1. So, for a school that had never had football, yep, that's a pretty respectable start. And they actually won the Susquehanna Valley Conference Championship in their 4th season in 1966. But boy, did they take some lumps after that. Over the next decade, especially into the 70s, they really struggled. I spoke with some of the former players and coaches, and they said, we never had a hard time getting games. Everybody wanted to schedule us to play homecoming because, that was going to be a sure win, So they never had any problem getting games. But, with that said, those players, they played with grit, certainly determination. And just because they weren't necessarily successful, they really did form the foundation for, certainly the dynasties that were to come. But, they had a 26-game losing streak at one point that started in 1978 and extended into the 1981 season. And at one point in 1979, the administration had seriously considered dropping the football program altogether just to focus more on soccer. And at that point, their record was actually 58, 108, and 5 from 63 to 79. And at that point, they only had 9 kids signed up to play football in 1979. So they had an assistant coach. He'd only been there 1 year, named Andy Ulickney, who went on to be the head coach there right before Jim Roth took over. He approached the school board and essentially said, look, I still think high school football has a place. I think it has a purpose. Even though he had no head coaching experience, he said, I will take over the program and try to keep it viable and afloat if you decide to keep football at Southern Columbia. So he was tasked at that point not just to take over the program, but essentially they were starting over. I mean, they didn't have enough, not even enough players to field one side of the ball. So again, he told me during an interview for the book that he literally was on the phone talking to 9th and 10th graders saying, hey, how would you like to go out for football? By the way, how big are you? So he knew the future of the program certainly relied on the underclassmen there, but he deserves a lot of credit for turning that program around and keeping it there.
He saved it. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, he did. I mean, within 4 years, they had won the Eastern Conference and completely turned things around. When they finally broke that losing streak in 1981, they, for whatever reason, they had played that game on a Thursday night, and the school was, they celebrated, they gave the students the next day off on Friday just to celebrate. That was a monumental win in the program's history, that's for sure.
I love it. And just folks from around the country, to put that in perspective, the man that took over, that was charged with saving it, indeed did save it. 12 state championships later, some national championships along the way. And oh, by the way, he's won enough games to be the winningest high school football coach in the state of Pennsylvania, and I haven't done the new list yet, but he's somewhere near the top 5 in the country in that. Merrill Shaffer is on the line. The book is called Roaring Tigers, The History of Southern Columbia Football. An outsider, so to speak, an hour away, who's fallen in love with what the Tigers are all about. And Merrill, it's not easy to write a book. I've done it. A lot of people have done it, of course, but it is not easy. A lot of people say to me, oh, that had to be a lot of fun, and it was, but it's not easy. You've got stats in here from every season. You've got every season as far as the schedule and results. So how shocked were you how not easy it is to write a book with this one?
That is correct. A friend of mine, again, when we would go camping, she deserves a lot of credit. Actually, Linda Waller is a good friend of mine, and we, her family and our family, and we have a couple other friends that go on this camping trip, and we all kind of learned about them at the same time. And I had written 2 other books. I authored another book back in 2017 on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then I was a co-author on a book back in 2020 in the first part of the pandemic, kind of talking about what life might look like after the pandemic. But I was toying with the idea of writing another one, and she's the one that actually said, you know what, somebody ought to write. Somebody ought to write a book about that football team up in Catawissa. She's like, I'm not even necessarily a football fan, but I would be interested in that. Mm-hmm. So that's where it started. And, you are right. It was 2 years in the making. Tons of interviews. Fortunately, going back to Mr. Ulickney, he had actually compiled a stat book that I believe had come from, some of the conference reports for, game reports and things like that. So they had compiled a stat book from 1962 up until 1991. And he forwarded me a copy of that book and said, hey, use whatever you can use out of it. So that was a tremendous help, especially for those early years. But with that said, I think I went through just days and days and weeks of just going through microfiche, going back through old newspaper articles and game reports. And I literally have notebooks full of handwritten stats, because I would look at the box scores of every game. I would write down who rushed for how many yards, who scored all the touchdowns, and then compiled like season ending stats with things like that. So yes, it was quite involved. I mean, I enjoyed every minute of it. It was frustrating at times. There were times where there were some gaps in there where I was struggling to find some of the information. And to be truthful, some of the photographs that are in the book, when it came time to obviously you'd like to have some pictures in there. It was difficult to find photos from back in the early, those early days of the program. And one of the local newspapers up there was the Daily Item newspaper out of Sunbury, Pennsylvania. I can't thank them enough. I mean, they were more than willing to allow me to use some of their archived, newspaper photos. And that was a tremendous help in having some. I think some of the players, it would be neat to see, some of the old photos of game days from back in the day, paged through the middle of the book. And, hey, there's a picture of me when I scored a touchdown back in 1976,
Yep.
So, that was a huge help. And, the school itself, some of they have several people that have over the years kept those kind of stats. And they've had the rosters because one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure, to the best of my ability, I tried to list every single player who has ever put on a uniform for the Tigers. I've listed rosters for every season, and I wanted everyone who's ever played or coached there to get recognition because they all deserve it.
Yeah.
Whether you played on a team that didn't win any games or you played on a state championship team, I felt like they all deserved to have that honor of being mentioned in the book. I'm sure over 60-some years, I've inadvertently missed somebody. I haven't been told that yet, but if that happens, I'll feel terrible.
You will be, and I know you will feel terrible too. But yeah, people aren't afraid to point things out anymore.
Right. but they've been wonderful. I mean, they helped me out with rosters. Dave Begley from Southern Columbia is a teacher there. He had compiled a bunch of stats, and he forwarded me a bunch of the rosters for, especially the years that I didn't have them. So they just the community and the school itself have just been tremendous in assisting with this project.
Yeah, it's great. One of the photos that caught my eye, of course, is maybe their most famous player that went on to the NFL, Henry Hydnoski. I saw a picture of him in there, and I also thought as soon as you said microfiche, everybody beneath the age of, I'm not sure beneath the age of, maybe 40, I don't know, probably went running to the dictionary to understand.
Right.
Well, they Googled it. They didn't go to a dictionary. They Googled what the heck is microfiche, but I know what that is. I've used it. Newspapers.com does a great job nowadays. I use a lot of that for my research, but it's great. The book is great, Merrill. Great job. Roaring Tigers, the history of Southern Columbia football. Because you are and were when you started an outsider. I don't think you're an outsider anymore. But what was one story that kind of caught your attention? You're like, wow, that's really really cool. Because I've always when I'm researching things, I think I know it all, and then all of a sudden I realize I'm not even close to knowing it all. Did you have anything that was like, wow, that's very, very cool, and my readers are going to enjoy this?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Again, when I took on this project, I kind of felt like, I'm just going to talk about, the history of the program, talk about the games that they've won. And it not that it's, I wouldn't say cool, but there was several things that have happened. That team has overcome some tremendous tragedies over the course of its existence. All the way back, they had a player that had recently graduated in the summer of '72 when Hurricane Agnes had struck the Pennsylvania area. Mm-hmm. There was a family that was trapped in their home, and this gentleman was one of a group of 9 people that went there to try to rescue them, and he got washed away in a creek there and drowned. And if you go to Tiger Stadium, there's actually at the base of the flagpole at the stadium, there's a big plaque in honor of him that his teammates the following homecoming in October of that year had posted there. But they also had a situation back in 2004 where they were at a football camp at Bloomsburg University, and in between sessions, several members of the team decided to go to a swimming hole, and 2 of the players had jumped in, and they immediately got caught in some current that were there. And 2 of their teammates jumped in to try to save them, and 2 of the boys drowned. It was just horrific and tragic. And ESPN actually had done a little mini documentary about that at the time. And that year, it was just a tremendous blow to the entire community. I felt so. It was hard to write about some of these things, and I wanted to do it in a respectful manner. But those were things that you couldn't ignore it. It's a part of their history, and I felt it would have been disrespectful to not put that in there. But the team that fall, because both of those players would have been starters on defense, they decided that they would take the field for their first defensive series with only 9 players on the first play, and honored them the entire season. Even in the state championship game, they did that. They went undefeated that year. And unfortunately, recently they had a player that had tragically he had taken his own life, and he was a very popular player, and several of his friends and teammates from there, every game they took the field with a flag, with his helmet, with his number on, and it had a slogan at the bottom that I believe his parents had come up with. It said, "Stop and think, your story's not over." And they painted the pole in suicide prevention colors. And I know the state title game that year, the last play, their last offensive play, they took the field with only 10 players, left the spot empty where he would have been, and then they gave the game ball to his family then. So those were some of the things that really struck me, that I, again, it was difficult to write about, but the community and the team itself are just resilient. They've overcome those things. It's an unfortunate part of their history. And those are things that I had not anticipated when I first started that. In fact, that 2004 team, I believe there's 6 players from that team that have passed away before the age of 30. So they've had some tremendous tragedies over the years that they've had to overcome. But they, again, I wanted to make sure I addressed that in an appropriate and respectful manner. I hope that I did so. But I just felt like it couldn't be ignored. I mean, those were things that, the team responded to that, and they've just been tremendous, the community and the team itself.
Yeah, it's a community football program. There's no
sure
doubt
is.
about that. And, along the way, they picked up a whole lot of wins. As I said, 3 straight small schools national championships at High School Football America. I'm talking with Merrill Shaffer. He wrote the book, Roaring Tigers, The History of Southern Columbia Football in Pennsylvania. They are staying at 2A this year. They were going to go up, but they appealed, and they're staying down. So that makes some people happy, some people not so happy. That's the way the fans of Pennsylvania football are at this point. And Merrill, just kind of as we go away here, I noticed that you are not a writer, meaning that's not your full-time job. as I wrote you to get this interview set up, you're like, well, Jeff, I've got a daytime job. And I see in your biography that you're in law enforcement, and thank you for that. But how difficult does that make it when I know you said it was 2 years, but it's not easy when you got to do something to keep the lights on, right, and put food on the table and all that.
I think it was more difficult for my daughter and my wife, actually, because every waking moment when I had spare time, I was kind of locked in the bedroom with the laptop, and so I think they were getting, once I was the publisher was kind of getting back to me and kind of saying, hey, when are we going to have this out? I think they were hoping to have it out in the fall, and I think my wife was kind of saying, when are we going to wrap this up? I'd like to be able to do something on the weekends here. So,
you got your life back,
right? But real quick, just going back to, I remember Andy Ulickney now I will say this was, as you said, some cool things. Andy Ulickney had told me when I interviewed him, please don't, even though they might not have been as successful on the field, don't look past the coaches that came before me. And my goodness, he was right. They had coaches there that had gone on. One was like a director of NFL scouting for the Seattle Seahawks. He was scouted for the Indianapolis Colts. Worked for the New Orleans Saints. They had another one, Joe Sarah, that he coached in 15 bowl games with Joe Paterno's staff at Penn State, won a national championship in 1986, and then worked as a graduate assistant. And I don't know if you remember when Adam Talifero from Penn State had that terrible injury to his spinal cord. He was actually named the team's liaison to Talifero and his family, and he was really instrumental in his recovery and rehabilitation from that injury. So, they've had other coaches that have gone on. They were All-American players whenever they played themselves in college. One went on to play professionally. I had never even heard of this league. He played in the Atlantic City Senators and was in the Atlantic Coast Football League back in 1960.
I never
60s.
heard of that either.
I never even heard of that, but he played professionally there. And it's funny that I think the continuity of the coaching staff is one of the biggest things with Southern, and I think that's a big key to their success. And Jim Roth, when I interviewed him, he said, that is certainly probably one of the biggest things is, the Pee Wee program is running the same plays as the offense as the varsity team. So by the time those kids get to the high school team, they've been running this place since they were in sixth grade. And the coaching staff, I think most of those coaches have been there in the neighborhood of 20 years. Because Jim Roth, I believe he just completed his 38th season there. He's not even the longest tenured coach. Andy Mills has been there a year longer than his defensive coordinator. So he's been there for 39 years. So
I love it.
It's just amazing. I do think they certainly have had the horses and have had great athletes there. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But the continuity of the coaching staff and the longevity of that program, I think that's I know Jim has said that is one of the things he's the most proud of. Is the longevity of the program, that they've been successful for a long period of time. But, again, they've had magnificent athletes there, no doubt about it. But that coaching staff, I think the continuity of that coaching staff goes a long way in terms of the success that they have had. I think this year, again, I know a lot of people, they should move up to AAA. They only have about 100 kids in a class. And I think this past season, if I'm not mistaken, they had 38 kids on the roster. They didn't even have 40 kids.
Yeah.
And you see the same family names generation after generation. And it's just an amazing area, amazing program, amazing school, just fascinated by it.
No doubt about that. You've done a good job to capture it. Merrill Shaffer has written the book Roaring Tigers. That's what we've been talking about. It's the history of Southern Columbia football. 3-time Small Schools National Champ at High School Football America, put out by Sunbury Press. And now time to promote it a little bit here. Merrill, how do people get the book? If they've listened to this, say, I'd love to pick this up and read it.
It is, as you said, it's available on Amazon. It is available at sunburypress.com, at the publisher's website. If anybody who's listening, I'm actually doing another book signing. I had one earlier in the fall, doing a book signing at Pretty Petals and Gifts by Susan next Saturday from 10 to 1. They have a tremendous amount of Southern Columbia apparel and merchandise there, and they've asked me to come back to do another book signing there, and that's in Paxinus, Pennsylvania, so near Southern Columbia. So I would love to. Maybe we'll work on a volume 2. I put on my Facebook page that some of the players come share some more stories with me. I'll take notes and we'll start working on volume 2 here because they won another title this year. So the book's already a little bit outdated because I have to update it with that. So
yes, you do. And they probably will have a few more as the years roll by here. Great job, Merrill, on this book. Merrill Shaffer, it's Roaring Tigers, the history of Southern Columbia football. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or on iHeartRadio, iHeart Podcasts, you will be able to go to highschoolfootballamerica.com. I'll put up the link to how to buy the book on Amazon and the Sunbury Press link. Great job, Merrill. Like I said, I know this is not easy. You did a great job. And as you said, being some guy who had to come in from the outside, that's not always the easiest thing. I remember when I went into Texas to write my book on Texas high school football, they're like, what's this Pennsylvania know about Texas high school football? But if you do it the right way, they end up loving you, and you've done a great job with it. So congratulations and much success.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
And that's today's High School Football America podcast, brought to you by GameStrat, America's premier sideline instant replay system with outstanding reliability. It has faster speed than Huddle's sideline, plus GameStrat has great customer service with great plans priced right for every coach's budget. And 5 more days remaining. That's all you have to take advantage of really steep discounts. To get a demo, go to GameStrat.com or click on the GameStrat banner ad located on every page of HighSchoolFootballAmerica.com. That's today's High School Football America podcast, and I'm Jeff Fisher.